Okay, so you want to own a pawn shop. Somebody walks in with a guitar, a gold chain, a power tool, and you hand them cash on the spot. If they come back and pay you back with interest, you win. If they never come back, you keep the item and sell it for a profit. Either way, you win. Every reality show about this business sells you that exact pitch. It's the one business in this whole series where losing genuinely doesn't seem to be on the table. Here's the problem. One of the largest pawn shop chains in America had to publicly restate years of its own financial statements because it had been getting the accounting on its own loans wrong enough to trigger a stock delisting warning and a shareholder lawsuit. So what actually happened? Here's the idea that explains almost everything else in this video. A pawn shop isn't really a retail store that happens to make loans. It's a lending business that happens to have a retail store attached to it. And the difference between those two framings is worth almost the entire profit margin in this industry. There are a few real versions here. An independent single-location shop is the classic mom-and-pop model, still the backbone of the industry. A small regional chain adds a handful of locations under shared branding and inventory systems. A large publicly traded chain, the kind with hundreds or thousands of storefronts across multiple countries, runs on institutional capital and Wall Street reporting requirements. And an online or hybrid pawn model, appraising items remotely and shipping cash or collateral, is the newest and fastest growing format. This video is about the independent commercial storefront, still how most people picture this business. Total startup cost typically runs $60,000 to over $200,000, and location and licensing explain only part of that range. The single largest line item isn't the storefront lease or the security system, it's the cash reserve set aside specifically for making loans and buying inventory. Underfund that reserve, and you can't actually serve customers because a pawn shop with an empty vault is just a store with nothing to sell and no loans to make. Add state pawnbroker licensing, security and surveillance systems, and display fixtures, and this is a business where the working capital, not the build-out, is the real barrier to entry. Every pawn transaction has two possible endings, and both of them are profitable, just not equally. If a customer redeems their loan, the shop earns interest, typically 3 to 25% a month, depending on the state, some of the widest regulatory variants of any business in this series. If the customer doesn't redeem it, the shop keeps the item and sells it at retail, usually marked up 50 to 100% over what was loaned against it. Industry-wide, revenue splits roughly 60% retail and 40% loan interest. That sounds like retail is doing most of the work. It isn't, once you look at the margins underneath each number. Here's the part of this business that runs completely backwards from how it gets portrayed on television. Loan interest carries a gross margin of 85 to 95% because the only real cost is the capital the shop already had sitting in its vault. Merchandise resale, by contrast, carries a gross margin of just 35 to 60% because it comes with real costs attached. Cleaning and repairing the item, storing it, marketing it, marking it down if it sits too long, and eventually selling it, often to a customer paying by card, which quietly hands another 2.5 to 3.5% straight to a payment processor. Redeemed loans are nearly pure profit on capital the shop already owns. Forfeited collateral is a genuine retail business, with genuine retail costs and genuine retail risk. The popular myth is that a pawn shop is quietly hoping you never come back for your guitar. The real math says the opposite. The shop makes more money, faster, and with less effort when you redeem your loan, pay the interest, and come back next month to do it again. Unredeemed inventory isn't a windfall sitting on a shelf. It's an asset with a clock running on it. Every additional week, an item sits unsold is a week of rent, insurance, and shelf space spent on merchandise that isn't generating a dollar. Gold and jewelry loans carry an extra layer of risk on top of that. Loan-to-value decisions are made against a spot price that can move meaningfully between the day a loan is made and the day, months later, the shop might need to sell the collateral. A shop that lent too generously against gold during a price spike can end up holding collateral worth less than the loan it secured, the pawn industry's version of a bank getting caught offside on its own collateral. Interest rate caps vary so much by state, from 3% a month up to 25%, that the exact same business model can be dramatically more or less profitable depending purely on which side of a state line the shop sits on. On top of the rate caps, pawnbrokers are required in most states to report detailed information on every item they take in, serial numbers, descriptions, and often photographs, to local police or a shared statewide database, specifically to help identify stolen property before it can be resold. None of this is optional, and it exists for an obvious reason. A business that accepts anonymous physical items in exchange for cash is exactly the kind of business that becomes a magnet for stolen goods if nobody's watching the intake counter. Take a shop holding $150,000 in outstanding pawn loans at an average of 15% a month in interest. That's roughly $22,500 a month, or $270,000 a year in interest income alone, on capital the shop already owns and simply keeps redeploying as loans get redeemed and remade. Add retail sales from forfeited items, and a healthy shop can land in the 15 to 25% net margin range industry-wide, with top operators reaching 30 to 40% through tight inventory turnover and disciplined loan-to-value decisions. The entire model depends on velocity. Capital that sits idle in the vault, or inventory that sits too long on a shelf, is capital that stopped earning anything at all. Look at what happened to EZCORP, one of the largest pawn operators in the country. In July 2014, the company's controlling shareholder, MS Pawn Limited Partnership, ousted CEO Paul Rothamel after the company had forecast weaker earnings and seen a sharp spike in short interest in its stock. That turned out to be the early tremor of a much bigger problem sitting inside the company's Mexican consumer lending subsidiary, Grupo Finmart. In April 2015, EZCORP delayed an earnings release, citing an ongoing review of that loan portfolio. By May, it had received a notice from NASDAQ for failing to file its quarterly report on time. In July 2015, the company announced it would restate its financial statements for all of fiscal 2014 and the first quarter of fiscal 2015, and it got worse from there. The problem centered on structured asset sales, transactions in which Grupo Finmart had sold portions of its loan portfolio to outside investors and booked the transactions as completed sales. On closer review, because Grupo Finmart had retained certain control rights over those loans as their servicer, they should have been treated as financing arrangements instead, meaning the $39.6 million in gains the company had already booked from those sales had to be reversed entirely. EZCORP's stock fell to $6.48 a share the day the restatement was announced, and by October 2015, the company confirmed the restatement would extend all the way back to fiscal 2012 and 2013 as well. A shareholder lawsuit followed within days of the initial announcement. Nobody stopped pawning gold chains or guitars anywhere in America while this was happening. The core lending business at EZCORP's actual U.S. pawn storefronts kept functioning the entire time. The company's crisis came from misaccounting for interest income and loan risk on a portfolio far from its retail counters, the exact same mechanic, interest income recognition on outstanding loans, that this entire industry's profitability quietly depends on getting right at every single scale, from a single storefront vault to a multinational loan portfolio. In the good year, loan-to-value decisions stay disciplined against real market prices. Redemption rates hold steady, retail inventory turns over briskly instead of aging on the shelf, and gold prices stay roughly stable through the life of outstanding loans. On $150,000 in outstanding loans generating $270,000 in annual interest income, plus a healthy retail operation, a 25% net margin can put well over $100,000 in the owner's pocket for the year. In the realistic year, nothing dramatic happens at first. A regional gold price dip means some loans made against jewelry now exceed the resale value of the collateral behind them. A new fintech buy now pay later competitor pulls some of the shop's smaller short-term borrowers away entirely. Slower moving retail inventory sits an extra few weeks before selling, tying up shelf space and cash that could have funded new loans instead. None of it makes headlines, but margin compresses from 25% towards something closer to 12% on that same loan and retail volume, and the owner's take-home falls to less than half of the good year's number. On the exact same storefront, with the exact same counter, taking in the exact same kinds of guitars and gold chains. That's the business. The item on the counter was never really the point. Whether you came back for it was, and either way, the shop was always going to get paid on the answer.